The bar mitzvah ceremony didn't always look the way it does today. In fact, for much of Jewish history, it barely looked like anything at all. In this episode, we investigate. When did a ceremony first appear? What did it look like? When did bar mitzvah boys start receiving an aliya? Leining, leading davening, a derasha? We'll trace how it all evolved among Ashkenazi Jews from the 11th century through the 17th.
When we open our Talmud Bavli, our Gemara, we open the Yerushalmi, and for that matter, when we open any of Sifrei Chazal that were widely available and published throughout the ages, we don't really find much in terms of the marking and the celebration of a bar mitzvah when a boy would turn 13 years old. One exception is the following passage that we're going to read from Bereishis Rabbah, Parsha Samach Gimel, which tells us on the Psukim Vayigdol Ha'Na'arim and Parshas Toldos. And there it's speaking about the birth, the growth of the maturity of Yaakov and Esav. And it says, in that context, the Medrash says, Amar Rabbi Elazar, that Rabbi Elazar said, Tzarich Adam li'tapel bibnoi ad yud gimel shana, that a father needs to deal with his child and tend to his child for until he's 13 years old. Mikan vayelach, from there on, tzarich sheyoymar, the father has to say a bracha. Baruch shaptarani ma'on shalzeh. Thank you for getting me out of the responsibility of punishments associated with this child. Which the Achrayim explain that the meaning of this is that because a father has an obligation to educate the child, so if the child isn't doing well, so then it reflects negatively on the parent, and it means sometimes that the parent isn't doing a good job in education, in educating the child, and so as a result, there can be a consequence to the father. Once, however, the child is an adult, now the child is on his own, and so therefore the father ceases to have responsibility for this child. And while this bracha is not stated in the Talmud Bavli or the Talmud Yerushalmi, it is stated here in the Medrash Bereishis Rabbah, and so it appears that there was something. This is something in terms of the marking of a bar mitzvah, is that the father would have said a bracha. However, this is a very far cry from having a celebration. This is a very far cry even from having a ceremony. I don't think anyone would call this a ceremony. If a father mumbled away a bracha on the day of his bar mitzvah, this is a far cry from a ceremony. However, things are going to change. And what we're going to see today is we're going to look at sources from the 1100s through the 1600s. And we're going to look at the story of the bar mitzvah during these centuries, because that's where we have a story. And as we're going to see, it's also all in the same region. It's all in the region of associated with Ashkenazi Jewry, and we're going to track to see what happens at what stage and how this story develops. So we're going to begin with a source from the late 1200s to the early 1300s, Reb Aaron Hakohen, the Orches Chaim. Reb Aaron Hakohen lived in Provence, and he has a halacha sefer, and in Hilchos Brachos, he writes as follows. He brings the Medrash that we just quoted, Vayigdalo Ha'Na'arim, and he says, so you need to say, Baruch Shaptarani Ma'on Shalzeh. He quotes the bracha, and he gives us that bracha. Good. But now, he adds something. He says as follows, V'yesh mevarchin oisa. Some people make this bracha at a specific time. When? Bipam rishoina sha'oila haben likreis b'Torah. The first time that the child goes up to read from the Torah. We'll talk more about what the meaning likreis b'Torah means later on. For right now, I'm going to say that it just means the first time getting an aliyah. We'll maybe fine-tune that a little later on. But the key message over here is we have a moment. There's a Pam Rishona. There is a moment when a child is getting his first aliyah. This is of the earliest times. We see this concept. There's a first time that a child is getting his aliyah, and this is like a special moment. And that's why it's being labeled and designated as the first. And let's remember, Midin HaMishnah, Midin HaGemara, a child could theoretically have an aliyah. how common was this for actual Jewish communities to actually do this. It doesn't seem to me, at least in Ashkenaz, that this was something that happened commonly. And so therefore, children aren't having an aliyah. And now is the moment the child is having his first aliyah. That's a big moment. And what do? It's so special that we move the bracha there. We move the father's bracha to the time of the aliyah. And I think this is now we are in a place where we're able to say, oh, there's something that's the semblance of a ceremony. There's that first aliyah, there's the father's bracha. Something is going on over here, is what we observe. And then he continues and says the following. This is how it appears in the standard text. It says that the Goin Rav Yehudai Zal, Kal Ma'aragla Bebeis HaKnesses, he refers to a great rabbi by the name of Yehudai. He rose in Shul, Ubeirach Bracha Zu, Bepam Rishayna, and he made this bracha for the first time when Bepam Rishayna Shakara B'nai B'Torah, at the very first moment, at the first time that his child had an aliyah. So it's, in other words, this is not just something Yesh Mevarchin, it's not just something some of us are doing, but this is a great rabbi did this. Now the question becomes, who is this great rabbi, Rav Yehudai? And a lot of people became very interested in this passage because there's one famous Rav Yehudai in Jewish history. You can tell with that, not saying the name Yehuda, but with adding that Yehudai at the end, that makes it sound Babylonian. And indeed, there was a Goin in Surah, one of the great Goinim, one of the most famous Goinim, who lived in the 800s, and his name was Yehudai Goin. And is this referring to him? So the Rishonim, from time to time, quote teachings from the Goinim. Are we hearing here a teaching that Rav Yehudai Goin, all the way in Surah, deep in Babylonia, is doing the bracha Baruch Sheptarani Ma'inshei Shalzeh, number one, and number two, associating it with an aliyah rishayna, a moment of a first aliyah, the Pam rishayna? Because if that's the case, then suddenly what we're calling a first development of the bar mitzvah ceremony, instead of placing it in Ashkenaz in the Middle Ages, suddenly you have to really put it in the early Middle Ages, in the time of the 700s in Babylonia. But this is very, very problematic. The reason this is problematic is because we have zero sources from the Gaonic period talking at all about a bar mitzvah celebration or marking of any sorts, number one. And number two, we don't have this bracha appearing in any sources in the Goinim, and in the places that were influenced by the Goinim, for example, Spanish Jewry, which is very influenced by the Goinim in Bavel, zero in terms of a bar mitzvah, zero in terms of a first aliyah, zero in terms of a Baruch Sheptarani, and therefore it would be very odd to have one of the Goinim in Bavel who was doing this. Well, as it turns out, then when we dig a little further, we realize that the Rav Yehudai over here should not be seen, b'pashtos, as the Rav Yehudai from Bavel. Number one, in the Orchos Chaim itself, there's different manuscripts, and some of them don't have the name Yehudai, some just say the Goin Rav Yehuda. And once it's a Goin Rav Yehuda, so that opens it up to being referring to someone more local. That's number one. But number two, there's a completely different source, and that's the Piskei Dinim of Rabbeinu Yechiel of Paris. Rabbeinu Yechiel of Paris was one of the great Rishonim who lived in the 1200s. And his Piskei Dinim were printed for the first time in Tafshan Lamed Gimel. And it's interesting to note, 1973, that Reb Aaron HaKohen of Lunil in his Orchos Chaim actually quotes from the Piskei Dinim of Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, even though it wasn't a very, very popular work, at least relative to other halachic works, but it is quoted by the Orchos Chaim. And if you go to the Piskei Rabbeinu Yechiel of Paris and you read what it says over there, let's read it closely, and we're going to see. Mishi yesh ben, when you have a child, v'yigeh l'shlosh asar shana, and he reaches 13, pam rishon she'oimeh b'tzibur likros b'Torah, the first time he rises in the congregation for a kriya, tzarech ha'av levarich, the father has to make a bracha, baruch atah Hashem, asher p'ta'ani ma'anshei shol zeh. The nusach is a little different over here, but I don't want to get involved in that. It's also noteworthy that there is Shem U'Malchus, which is a major debate amongst the Rishonim whether this bracha should be said with Shem U'Malchus. The Orchos Chaim, when he gave us the bracha, didn't say yes or no. He didn't specify saying Baruch Atah Hashem. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. So we don't really know what he would have thought. What would the issue be over here? The issue is that some people don't like the idea of using a bracha that you don't have in the Gemara. So for example, there's a whole controversy about the bracha, so you don't have it in the Gemara. Okay, so can you say the bracha? So some people are not so comfortable with it. for this reason. That would be why some would not want to say it with Shem HaMalchus, because of the fact that it didn't appear in the Talmud Bavli, and do we have the right to invent new brachas at a later period? But here you see that in the Piskei Dinim of Rabbi Chiel of Paris, it quotes this, and it says that it was with Shem HaMalchus. Okay, then it continues and says, V'hagoyin Rabbi Yehuda ber Baruch, the Goyin Rabbi Yehuda the son of Baruch, he rose in the shul and he made this bracha when his son rose to read the Torah for the first time. There you go. There you have it. You have Rabbi Yehuda ben Reb Baruch. Rabbi Yehuda ben Baruch, we know exactly who this is. It was a famous Rabbi Yehuda ben Baruch that would have been well known to Rabbeinu Yechiel of Paris, and he was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Gershom Meir HaGoyla. That is, he lived in the 1000s. And he was from the generation of Rashi's teachers. Rashi quotes this Rabbeinu Yehuda ber Baruch in his commentary to the Gemara, and he's famous for a very interesting chumrah that he had, and that is when it came to Yom Kippur, Sveika D'Yoma, he would fast 2 days. And so there was a school in Ashkenaz that had this chumrah. We don't know which day is Yom Kippur. You observe every Yom Tov 2 days, so it should be Yom Kippur. This is one of the chumras that's often linked to Rabbi Yehuda ber Baruch. Anyway, so this is probably the person that Rabbi Aaron HaKohen is referring to. And so now what we're able to say is, we see something happening in Ashkenaz. It's there in the 1000s, it's there in the 1100s, it's there in the 1200s, it's there in the 1300s. What do we see? We see a moment of a first aliyah. It's a ceremony coupled together with the bracha of Baruch Sheptarani Me'ina Shalazeh, maybe even with Shem HaMalchus. And so here we have that element of a ceremony. Now, question at this point is, what does it mean when it says the child read the Torah first? That's an ambiguous term. Some people might look at that and say, oh, so is the child the Baal Koira? Is he getting an aliyah, or is he the Baal Koira? So we need to look into this a little further to understand what was actually going on at that time in terms of what was the relationship between the Baal Koira and the person getting an aliyah. Because let's remember that in the Gemara, you don't have a Baal Koira. Every guy gets up and he reads his own aliyah. So what's the situation in Ashkenaz? Is it that way that everyone is reading their own aliyah? It's not really that way. So let's read what the same Rabbi Aaron HaKohen in the Orchos Chaim, what he tells us, what's going on in Ashkenaz in his days in the late 1200s, early 1300s, and then we'll be able to properly assess what do these sources mean when they say the child read the Torah, he was koira b'Torah. Says Rabbi Aaron HaKohen in the halachas of Sheni v'Chamishi, v'oimid HaKoira, the Baal Koira, the person getting an aliyah, rises, u'poiseach ha-sefer, he opens the sefer, lido isma yikra bay, to see what he's going to be reading. So he's referring here clearly to the person getting an aliyah, and he calls him the koira. The koira shloisha psukim, and he has to read 3 psukim, l'chol ha'pachas b'seder shavua. It's talking about on the weekday. So your aliyah has to be in that week's parsha at least 3 psukim. The koira balachash, the person getting an aliyah reads quietly, and shliach tzibur is b'kol ram. The shliach tzibur is reading out loud. So in other words, Rabbi Aaron HaKohen is giving us a model, what we call today a Baal Koira. He has it there, the shliach tzibur is reading out loud. And why do we do it this way, which is not the din of the Gemara? Kedei shelo yispayesh im lo yikare b'diktuk. In lo yikra b'diktuk. We don't want anyone to be embarrassed if they don't know how to read properly. And so therefore we have the chazan reading for everyone. Now notice, so this is one way of how things were being going on in Ashkenaz at this time. Who is what does he call the person getting an aliyah? The koira. He calls. So when he's going to say the child is koira, he gets up to koira b'Torah. All he means is that he's having an aliyah in our language. It does not at all mean that he is the Baal Koira. However, this is not the only minig that's in Ashkenaz during these centuries. Rabbi Aaron HaKohen goes on to quote another one, and he quotes Hey Reish Shin, which most have understood to be Rashi, that there's a tshuva from Rashi about how Kriya should work. And Rashi says, Mitzvah likrois kol echad v'echad. Really, ideally, everyone should be reading on their own. However, if the one getting an aliyah is not going to read properly, so then the chazan helps him out quietly, what we call in modern English unterzagen. So we're still closer to the way this is being done in the Gemara. You're reading your own aliyah, but we're going to have someone unterzagen to help you out. Inami, another option. If the one getting the aliyah is not well learned, And so therefore, the quiet Untersagen is not going to be effective. So then, Lema le hachazen kol teva v'teva balachash, let the chazan literally tell him every single word. V'akoyre yikare b'kol ram, and then the one getting an aliyah is going to read it out loud. But either way, these two variations, Rashi, I'm going to go with the fact that, with the assumption this is Rashi. Rashi is telling us how it's done in their day. There are still people who are going up and reading on their own, if they know. B'diavad, if you don't know, so then we put a guy on the side, and he could give you a little more help, he could give you a little less help. So if this is a minig that is going on in Ashkenaz in the 1000s and in the 1100s, but if this is something that's there in some places, and then at the same time we have the bar mitzvah boy having koyrer rishayna, so then what is he doing when he's being koyrer rishayna? So the answer is going to be koyrer rishayna would be depends on who he is. In other words, he would be treated like any other balabas. If the kid was really, really talented, he would read his own aliyah. And then in that case, you could say, oh, here we have the concept of bar mitzvah boy reading and being the bal kaira and being moitzi other people. You would say you had it already here. If, however, he wasn't so well learned, so he wouldn't have been doing it on his own. He would have been doing it with help. So again, you have, if we're dealing with a place that has this formulation of the custom, so then you do, on a technical level, you essentially have over here the bar mitzvah boy reading for the public, but then at the same time, this is a far cry from the idea of he's reading the whole parsha. Not at all is he reading the whole parsha. He's essentially getting an aliyah. It's just if in that place getting an aliyah means you read it on your own, so then that's what he's doing. And if at that place, getting an aliyah means with assistance, so then that's what he's doing. And so therefore, this concept of what is this ceremony going on just needs to be a little fine-tuned. It could be in some places an aliyah. It could be in some places he's reading his own aliyah with or without assistance, but it's no more than that. Now what happens is that as we move through the centuries, we're going to see that this concept turns into a must, into a chiyuv. Ad kadei kach, like it's not just this is what we do, but we're going to see language of that the child whose bar mitzvah is that day or that Shabbos is basically second on line, as we're going to read right now, in terms of his obligation to get an aliyah. This was something Jewish communities struggled with a lot because there were a whole bunch of people who needed an aliyah for various things. And as the years went on, there were more and more people added to that list. There's only so many aliyahs to go around. It's not like today where you have class shuls galore. And so therefore there was a lot of competition over these aliyahs. So the poskim had to essentially create a triage system of who goes first. So let's listen in to the words of Reb Mordechai Yaffe, who is known as the Levush. Remember, it says in the Megillah, right? So many descriptions of the garment. Reb Mordechai Yaffe, his name is Mordechai. And so he uses that pasuk, Mordechai Yatza, Levush, so he calls one section Levush Tchelas, one section he calls Levush Achor, one section he calls Levush Argaman, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, he lived in the 1500s and in the early 1600s as well. The last years of his life, he was the Av Bezdin in the city of Posen. That's associated, this is further east, this is in Poland. And he writes over there, I am going to present before you the minig in Posen for Kriya in the Sefer Torah. Who are the chiyuvin? Who gets pushed off before whom? So he says, a nar that has a bar mitzvah on that Shabbos, even if he doesn't have din iroinois poi, which means even if he isn't a citizen, which means in these Jewish communities, if you're a local, that mattered a lot in terms of a whole bunch of things, including in terms of who gets aliyahs. But if the child is a bar mitzvah, even if he doesn't have citizenship in that town, in that city, it doesn't matter, he's getting an aliyah that day. However, as long as he doesn't push away someone else who is a local, who has a chiyuv. So that you can't do. The bar mitzvah boy who is from elsewhere can't push away a local who is on the list of chiyuv. Avolim a bar mitzvah ben ir, if the child of the bar mitzvah is a local, so then it's doima l'chol chiyuvim. He's like all the other ones who are obligated to get an aliyah. Why? Kivain shehu yom chinuchay. This is his launch day. This is Yom Chinuchay, Chanukas HaMishkan. This is when we're starting. And so therefore it's really important. And the only person who comes before him is the Chassan b'Yom Chasunasai. So if a Chassan is getting married on that day, so then he would come first. I'm not 100% sure. It's possible chasen b'yom chasunasai means, remember the weddings are Friday. So it's possible chasen b'yom chasunasai means his wedding was last night, and we call that Shabbos Yom Chasunasai, because let's remember the wedding celebration is going Friday night deep into the night. So I have a feeling that's what it means. But what if it's not a chasen on the day of his wedding? What if it's a chasen that's mezamer and oisai? What's mezamer? They sing a special poem of piyutim for him. This means the ufruf, and and there were some chasanim who had an ufruf that was not mezamer and oisai, and that is someone who was already prior married. So we're not talking about him because that's a lower level of chiyuv. If you have a bar mitzvah and an ofra for someone getting married for the first time, shavin, it's the same equal chiyuv, and therefore yatilu goyrol, they are going to make a goyrol to see who is going to end up having the aliyah. So what do we have here that we didn't have in the earlier sources? We have over here this concept, like this is a really, really important moment, this aliyah moment, this concept that again we see starting at first with Rabbi Yehuda bar Baruch. Now, I said the word starting, so let me make a note here. Just because you only find a source from 1960 doesn't mean the thing didn't exist before 1960. Maybe it did exist before 1960. We just don't see a source beforehand. The earliest source that we see is in the 1000s with a report of Rabbi Yehuda bar Baruch, and then by the time we come to the late 1500s, early 1600s, we see very much solidified and regulated as a chiyuv, this aliyah that was done on Shabbos. Okay, but in addition to this ceremony, the ceremony seems to have gone through a expansion of sorts, and we pick this up from a few sources from the 1400s. And number one, we're going to read from the Maharil. The Maharil passed away around the year 1430 or so, and Rabbi Yosef Yuspa Ostreicher, he also lived in the 1400s, and they're both going to have a common denominator where we're going to see what? We're going to see them talking about the child on that Shabbos, on that special Shabbos where there's already a ceremony, and so far there's only two parts to it. There's the part of the aliyah, and there's the father's bracha linked to it. We're going to see another part gets added, and that is the child's going to become the chazan, so the shliach tzibur. So let's have a look at the Maharil. Says the Maharil, Amar Ma'ari Segal, remember his student wrote it, so that's why it's not written in his voice. Sheshalu, his name was Yaakov, he was a Levi, hence Segal. Sheshalu al Nar Anasa ben Yigon Shana b'Shabbos, his birthday was on Shabbos. So also Shaila, can he be the chazan Leil Oisei Shabbos? Can he be the chazan for Ma'ariv Friday night? Well, what was the answer? From the answer, we'll understand why there is a doubt. The answer was, no, he can't be the chazan Friday night. Why? Because we daven Ma'ariv always early. You're allowed to do that because you're allowed to extend Shabbos, but it doesn't magically turn the kid into a 13-year-old, and so therefore, he is not allowed to be a shliach tzibur on Friday night. What does this tell us? What this tells us was that they wanted the child to be a chazan on Friday night, and probably his friends, when the bar mitzvah was Tuesday and Wednesday, so when the big Shabbos came, they were the chazan Friday night, and everything was great because there was no problem. However, here with this guy, this kid, his birthday was Shabbos, and so unfortunately for him, he was not able to be the chazan on Friday night. So here we start seeing this idea of the kid also being a shliach tzibur. This also surfaces from the Leket Yosher, from Rabbi Yosef Yuspa Ostreicher. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, who's known as the Trumas Hadeshen, living in Ashkenaz in the 1400s, and he's talking about his teacher, the Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, and he says, Keshakara b'noi b'tchila l'sefer Torah, when he had his first aliyah, that same language, like the first time, Betchila. Kishehischel Baruchu, when his son started saying the words, Baruchu es Hashem Amvayrach, Amar, it's at that moment that the father said the bracha of Baruch Sheptarani. However, according to this report, he did not say it in the nusach of Baruch Hata Hashem. He said it in Aramaic, Brich Rachmana Malka Da'ara Sheptarani Shepaitrani Me'oinesh Zeh. Why was he doing it in Aramaic? It comes back to the issue we spoke about before of the question and the doubt of whether it's appropriate to say it with Shem Malchus, given that this bracha doesn't appear in the Gemara. Well, this is a creative solution because the Gemara in Berachos, when it's talking about Birchas Hamazon, it's pretty clear that on the one hand, if you do it in this Aramaic formulation, saying Brich Rachmana, you're Yotze the bracha. So on the one hand, you have the bracha. On the other hand, you're not saying you don't have the problem of the bracha levatala with this. And so this kind of is this interesting space. Whereas if you do Baruch and then go on in Hebrew, but you don't say Hashem Malachos, then you don't have a bracha. You're just saying a proclamation. You don't even have the chalois of a bracha. This gives you the chalois of bracha because it says Rahmana. That's a reference to Hashem. So you have here the chalois of a bracha, but because it's in Aramaic, there's no chash bracha levatala. That seems to have been what the Trumas Hadeshen was doing. Also interesting, he didn't wait for the end of the aliyah. He did it right away. Why he did it right away during the Baruch? Ich weiß nicht. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yosef goes on to say that there's a chiddush over here. What was the chiddush over here? 1 second. We are deep into Shabbos already. There's been a lot going on where this kid has been performing for the whole audience. So why are we waiting for the Baruch Shaptarani for this moment over here? This is what he says. He says, look, Kaidon Lachain, so this means last night. Last night, Friday night, there was a beautiful meal. And the kid did the Rabbi Sai. So the child doesn't do that. So now as an adult that he did that, his father should have said the Baruch Shaptarani right then and there. Another thing, he was the Chazan Leil Shabbos Beis HaKnesses. His birthday was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He didn't have a problem of the early Friday night. And Afal became Himtin in Abracha ad Kriyas HaTorah. He waited till Kriya. It's got to be by Kriya. Why does it have to be by Kriya? The first time the child is doing something in public, so now there's a ceremony already to do with that. The simplest answer to this would be because it used to be the only ceremony was the aliyah. And so therefore, that's when the bracha was done. And that's been going on since the 1000s, the 1100s, the 1200s. So in the 1400s, when we start being chazan, we're not going to change the meaning. It's a meaning 300 years already that the bracha is linked with the aliyah. And so it does appear to me from these sources that the concept of the bar mitzvah boy going up and doing zimun, going up and being the chazan, the shliach tzibur on Shabbos, is a later development that the first indications of this is from the 1400s. Okay, now let's move to the party, the Mishnah, because missing from all of these sources is any idea of we're making some sort of feast or we're making some sort of celebration. The most famous source that discusses the Mishnah comes to us from the 1500s, Reb Shlomo Luria, otherwise known as the Maharshal. He passed away in the 1570s, and his Yam Shel Shlomo, on Maseches Baba Kama, he has a long discussion about the Geder of a Sudas Mitzvah. This matters in Jewish law to know what has the definition of a Sudas Mitzvah, because, for example, on the 9 days, if there's a Sudas Mitzvah, according to halacha, you could eat meat. If it's not a Sudas Mitzvah, then not. There's also a din that a Talmud Chacham, the Rambam has this in Ilchos Deis, shouldn't eat at public meals unless it's a Sudas Mitzvah. There are many other nafkaminas, and so therefore, from a halachic perspective, it's important to know what is the definition of a Sudas Mitzvah and not. So he has a long discussion about this, and his last item on the list that he discusses is the following. The Sud is Bar Mitzvah Sha'oisen Ashkenazim, the Sud of the Bar Mitzvah that the Ashkenazim make. I'm a little in doubt when he says Ashkenazim, what is he negating? Is he saying the Ashkenazim and not Polish Jews? Remember, he's in Lublin, he's in Poland. Is he saying we in Lublin don't do it, but the German Jews do it? That's one possibility. Another possibility is he's saying Ashkenazim in a broader sense, meaning us in Germany and Poland, we do it, but Archenu Bnei Yisrael Svardim, living in Morocco and in Yemen, etc., are not doing it. So I don't know which one he's negating. Ich weiß nicht. I don't want to say, because I don't know. All right, so he goes weiter and he says, so it's a custom that's going on. It's for sure a Sudas Mitzvah. The name, what was it called? Sudas Bar Mitzvah. Mitzvah, you have mitzvah is baked into the name. So of course it's a Sudas Mitzvah. We're praising God. What are we thanking God for in the Simcha? Shazacha Hanar Li is Bar Mitzvah, because Gadol HaMetzuva V'oiseh. And he spent some time in this going into the Gemara, which we're not going to do. But the basic idea is that it's better to have a mitzvah and be commanded for the mitzvah than to do it without a commandment. So you're doing mitzvahs for the first few years of your life, that's wonderful. But now that it becomes an obligation, this is a real happy occasion. He demonstrates this from what Rav Yosef said in the Gemara, and as a result, he's like, for sure, this is a Sudas Mitzvah. Then he goes on to give a caveat, and his caveat's the following. He says, of course, it has to be done on that day. Because what is the Simcha about? The Simcha is about something, about a certain moment. Okay, think about a bris. What's the Simcha of a bris? It's what you're doing. It's not about the 8th day. it's about the bris. So if you make the bris on the later day, no problem. But what's the simcha of the bar mitzvah? I became a bar chiyuv. So that's at a certain moment. You need to do it on that day. He's like, I don't like the idea that it's being done on a different day. Maybe it even loses its status of the Sudas Mitzvah. How is it a Sudas Mitzvah if it's done on another day? So to him it's a davar pashut, it needs to be done on that day. Now the reason he's complaining about this, and his language is that no one does it on that day. And the reason no one does it on that day is because if it's being done on Shabbos, which does seem to be, from all the sources that we're seeing now and that you're going to see in the future, everything looks like it's around Shabbos. Let's remember, weddings are also Friday leading into Shabbos. Of course the bar mitzvah is going to be done on Shabbos. So if it's on a Shabbos, so only if the kid is born on Shabbos is a boy bayom. If the kid is born any other day of the week, if bar mitzvah is any other day of the week, it's shaloi bisman, and therefore he takes it as a given that it's not happening on time, and he's asking, Lama yikar sudas mitzvah? And his answer is, do you know something? If the child is going to give a derasha on the suda, me'ein hamu'ura, if he's going to give a derasha about the bar mitzvah, and it sounds like this was a normal thing. In other words, we're hearing over here another important thing, that at the Mishnah, the bar mitzvah bach would give a derasha about something related to the bar mitzvah. So he says, now you're sharing words of Torah. If you're sharing words of Torah, it's no worse than a suda of chinuch habayis. Before the bar mitzvah, he talks about a suda of chinuch habayis. And he says that if you want, that's the first thing that happens in your house, should be where you get together and you thank Hashem and you learn words of Torah. He says that counts as a sudas mitzvah. So bar mitzvah shaloi bismana, if the bacher is going to share words of Torah, shouldn't be any worse than that. I'm not sure how important it is that the bacher of the bar mitzvah does it, or that's just what people were doing then. Because in those days the father didn't give the derasha and the uncle didn't. But is it dafka a din in the katan, or is it a din that words of Torah are being spoken? It's not entirely clear to me. But al kapanim, what do we see over here? We see over here that in the 1500s he's taking it as a davar apashat that a mishnah is happening, and presumably it's on Shabbos, and that the child is giving a drasha of the bar mitzvah at this time. By the way, because of what he's writing over here about the importance of it being boy bayoim, it became very normal, and the Rebbe has a number of letters of this, when people cannot make the celebration on the day for whatever reason, that at least something should be done on that day. The idea of gathering together, and there should be 10 people, and there should be some celebration, and there should be some chazaras dach, or some words of Torah that are shared on that day in order to satisfy what the Marshal and others are referring to over here. However, the concept of the sudas, the bar mitzvah, is going to get a major boost when you move into the next century, that is when you move into the 1600s. Because what happened was, and in 1648 in Lublin, a sefer was printed that was called Yalkut Chadash. The author of the sefer, his name was Rabbi Yisrael, and what he did was, he took a number of concepts from Kabbalah, teachings from Kabbalah, that in his mind were appropriate for the masses. So there's a lot of Kabbalah that's esoteric and it's not for the masses. There are limitations in Chazal on what could be taught to whom, and those were taken very seriously in those days. But he was like, there are certain things that the masses should know about. And so he created a Yalkut collecting stuff from the Arizal, but a major chunk is material from the Zohar. And in that respect, he quotes in the Sefer a passage from Zohar Chadash, which is a particular edition of the Zohar that was printed for the first time in 1597. So 50 years before his Sefer was when the first time the Zohar Chadash was printed. And the words that Rabbi Yisrael writes in Hebrew is that there's an obligation on a person to make a soda on the bar mitzvah, just like the day of the chasana. Just like the day of the chasana. And there is tremendous schar for doing it. The Zohar Chadash, the Zohar, was around for a very long time. But how many people have access to it? So for the beginning of its history, the Zohar is completely concealed. Then it becomes revealed, but it's still not published. It's still not printed. And so there's very few people who have access to it. So for example, the Marshal is writing about the Suda of the Bar Mitzvah, and he doesn't mention the Zohar at all. He passed away 20 years before the Zohar Chadash was printed. And so my point is that whatever the Zohar is going to tell us was very much not public knowledge for a very long time. But now, not only is the Zohar Chadash printed, but now a work geared for the masses summarizes this idea that it's great to make a Sudas Bar Mitzvah, and then from there, the Magen Avram, who's writing his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch in the 1600s, quotes it from here, quotes it from the Yalkut Chadash. He says, the Yalkut Chodesh says, that the Zohar says, that it's great to make a Suda of the Bar Mitzvah. So let's have a read. And this is going to have a big influence, because suddenly now, it's like, oh, the Zohar, this very, very important source, has this idea. Let's read what the Zohar has to say. So the Zohar Chodesh says as follows. Amar Rabbi Lazar said, until 13 years, a person is ishtadlusei de barnash. A person's work involves what? The level of soul that's called nefesh. And that's all they got. But from 13 and up, if the child wants, the bacher wants to be meritorious, so then they give the child a higher level of soul. It's not called nefesh, it's called nishmasa. And he describes it. It's a holy one, and it comes from a high place, and it's cut out from the kisei hakavod of Hashem. So in other words, here we have the idea of a person has one level of soul as a child, but bar mitzvah on a spiritual, mystical level means there's another level of soul that's entering them or that's being revealed in them, etc. The Zohar goes on to say about Reb Shimon bar Yochai that he invited the Balei Tshuva and the Talmidei Chachamim to have a suda, a great suda, by the bar mitzvah of his son, Rabbi Lazar bar Reb Shimon. And he decorated his house with many fancy things, and he had the rabbi sitting on this side and on that side, and he was in a very jolly and joyous mood. So the other rabbis asked him, why are you so happy on this day over any other day? And Reb Shimon bar Yochai answered, because on this day, a new soul has come down, meaning a new soul has come down into the child. This gives us a whole nother perspective beyond the legal requirement of now I'm mitzvah v'oisa for mitzvahs. It gives us a whole nother spiritual window into what's going on at the time of the bar mitzvah. And this is what Reb Shimon bar Yochai is focusing on. He's not focusing on the fact of mitzvah v'oisa. What's being focused on over here is the new level of soul that comes into the body of the bacher, the bar mitzvah, and this is a reason for great celebration. A few pages later in the Zohar Chodesh it says that on this day there's a choiv on tzaddikim to make a special, a joyous occasion, just like the day of the chuppah, just like the day of the wedding. And so here you have this concept in the Zohar that again, in the 1600s, this becomes public knowledge, public attention when it's printed in these popular Sfarim, and in that way, it mainstreams even more the concept of having a mishta associated with the bar mitzvah. And obviously, what's going to happen as a result of this? Now you're going to start seeing people showing off, people who are spending big time on their celebrations. So now we turn to Rabbi Yorer Chaim Bachrach, who was a Rav in Worms in the 1600s. However, he didn't live in Worms all of his life. There was a period that he lived in other cities and other communities, such as Frankfurt. And as is apparent from this tshuva, Siman Kuf Chav Dalid, this event occurs when he's living in one of those other communities like Frankfurt. He writes, I was invited by a good friend, and he's also a Talmid Chacham, and he invited me that I should come to his community, which is Worms, in honor of Simchas B'nai Yechidoi, who became a bar mitzvah on Parshas Beshalach, and all expenses paid. This guy is going to pay the Chavis Yor all expenses to come in for the bar mitzvah. Now, even though he really was Haftzarasa G'doi L'Hoisa B'Ksav, he wrote letters trying to persuade me to come, and V'ramaz Gamken Al Moyer Matan. He also indicated that he's going to be giving me gifts for coming. So this is a great deal. It's a very sweet deal because all expenses paid and more. Nonetheless, Samti La'al Milasai, I put his word as nothingness, and I decided, no, I'm not going for the bar mitzvah. Okay. Now he sends me a new letter and reporting, gloating about the Mishteh HaGodel Asher Hoisa. He writes that G'doila Akila Yusham, all the great people of the community of Worms were there. The Echamam Leinoser Bebesei, no one stayed home. Rak Kulam Nasu L'Simchasei, they all came for his occasion. V'shehetiv Charalai, and he's really mad at me, Al Amdi Chutza, for me staying apart. This is how I can atone when I give him advice. He says that this son who just became bar mitzvah, he's a kli muchal l'Torah, he's capable of studying. And he gave a wonderful drush by the bar mitzvah. Here you see another indication for the concept of a drush at the bar mitzvah in the 1600s. And there he's asking the Chavas Yair, you didn't come to bar mitzvah? Give him a learning plan. And what sefer should he learn first? What should he learn second? Which turns into a very interesting tshuva from the Chavas Yair, where he expresses his opinion on a derech halimud, which is a fascinating topic, but not for now. So here you see a real lavish Suda, the who's who, everyone's there. A very interesting piece of testimony from the 1600s in Worms. And as a result, knowing how Jewish communities regulated almost every area of life, as we discussed over here, it was only a matter of time that these su'udas were going to be regulated. And that brings us back to the late 1500s, to Krakow. And the Takanas of Krakow from the year 1595 have been preserved and printed, and it's a mix of Yiddish and Hebrew. Let's go through it and you'll see how the community is grappling with the bar mitzvah. So here's the rules for a bar mitzvah. Okay. Me'asara gedolim ulamata. So whoever is paying 10 coins, it calls them big coins, it's a certain denomination, whoever is paying that or less per year. So in other words, if you're in a tax bracket of 10, we'll just call it dollars, $10 or less per year, zomen bitin biyoim hey. So bitin means you should ask. You should bita, like please come. So basically you invite for the bar mitzvah when? On Thursday, because when's the bar mitzvah? The bar mitzvah is on Shabbos. Now, why are they telling you to do it on Thursday? What's wrong with inviting to the bar mitzvah on Shabbos? On Friday. The reason is kedei sheyuchal lekabel dagin, so that you can receive fish. It was very normal, we are able, when we read these takanas, that when you're invited to a wedding or a bar mitzvah or another occasion, you want to A, send something, and B, one of the things that apparently was sent most often was fish. The community regulated who could send fish or how many people can send fish. Maybe they were concerned that if too many people are buying fish, there'll be a shortage. Maybe it will raise prices. Maybe it was just, why should one Jew get so much fish? Maybe it's Baal Tashchis, I don't know. But they didn't like the idea that too much fish is going over to these people who are making weddings on bar mitzvahs, so they're regulating it. But if you're only paying $10 or less for taxes, so there's going to be a strict limit on how many people you can invite anyway. So let them all buy you fish. So because they're all going to buy you fish, invite them on Thursday, which will give them enough time to go ahead and buy the fish and give you the fish. Okay. Then he goes on and says, but you're not allowed to invite more than a minyan mitzvah. Finished. 10 people. If you're in that lower tax bracket, you can invite to your bar mitzvah 10 people. End of story. Same thing for a pidyon abed. If you're in a higher tax bracket, you're paying from 10 and up. So then it has the same as a bris milah. We'll see what the rule in a bris milah is in a second, where if a person was paying more than 10, then they were able to invite 25 people. We'll read that, we'll see that in a second. Okay, then he goes on to say that if it's a wedding, if it's a bris, if it's the vachnach before a bris, if it's a bar mitzvah, if it's a pidyon haben, the shamish is not allowed to give out notes or otherwise invite unless he's following the rules. And if he doesn't, he's gonna lose his shamashas. So the shamish apparently is involved in the inviting. And there's two ways of doing it. One, he could give notes to people, says you are invited, or he could orally tell people. The shamish is not allowed to invite more than the rule, whatever the rule says. And if he does invite more, he's going to be punished by losing his job as being the community officer. Also, the Bala Suda is not allowed to ask other people to come, and it's a very high fine. It's 1 gold coin. Now remember, some of these people, they can't. Their tax bracket is much less than a gold coin. But if you violate this rule, your fine is going to be a gold coin, which is a lot of money. And it goes on to say that the shliach is going to punish. I think it means the shliach of the bezdin or the community is going to punish the infraction per the desires of the parnasim and the manhigim of the community. Okay, so he referenced before the rules for a bris milah. So because they are linked to the bar mitzvah, we have a very incomplete picture now for the bar mitzvah. We just know under $10. $10 and less, you can invite 10 people. But what about more than that? It says the same like a bris. So let's read the bris and then we'll see the gradations over here. So here's the rules for the bris. If a person is paying 10 or less, so then he can invite to the bris 15 people and 2 servers, meaning waiters. That's in addition to the rabbi. You can have 1 chazan, you can have 1 shamish community officer. Orchem, meaning people out of town are not part of the thing, like you want to feed them, that's fine. I guess like there's no, what's in it for you? Like you're not building up status with them because they're going to be gone tomorrow anyway. So it's just a mitzvah. You want to do it, God bless you. Darshan. You want to have the darshan, that's, you can have him. The moil, the sandik, and anyone living in the home doesn't count to the number. Okay, what if you're paying from 10 till 20? So then you can invite 25 people. 20 till 1 gold coin, but not actually reaching a gold coin. So if that's all you're paying in your annual tax, you can invite up to 35 people. If you're paying 1 gold coin until 2 coins, gold coins, you can invite 50 people, and now you can already have 4 waiters and 2 chazanim. I guess you want to have a harmony or something like that, and 2 shamashim. I'm not sure why you need 2 shamashim. If you pay more from 2 gold coins and up, then mug bitin kefirit soinoi, he could invite whoever he wants. So if you're in that bracket, you're good to go, no limitation. So all that transfers over for the bar mitzvah. Here you see, because the suddahs were being done. Remember, the Marshal is writing sometime in the 1500s in Poland. This is in the 1500s in Poland, and the communities regulated all areas in life in ways that would make many of you, maybe all of you, cringe at various points, and here you're seeing one expression of that. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to talk about the following text, which gives us a full picture. Till now, we don't have a full picture. We have pieces. We saw the aliya, it's the first aliya, it's with Baruch Shaptarani, was added to that being a chazan, added to that was the Mishnah, involved in the Mishnah was a derasha. Okay, but the best description is from what's become a favorite source in recent weeks, and that's Rabbi Yosef Shamish, who's writing the Minhagim of the Kehillah of Worms in the 1600s. And he has a very full description of the bar mitzvah, the way it happened in his day in Worms. And you're going to see here all the pieces that we've been talking about that have existed for the prior 500 years. They're all come together here in a very neat, nice program. Okay, he writes as follows. On the Shabbos after the child turns 13 years old. Shabbos after. We know already that's when this happens. Most boys who are bar mitzvah are chazanim during Kriyas HaTorah to read the Sedra B'tzibur. And it's very clear what he means over here is they're reading the whole parsha. By the time you come to the 1600s, it's very clear there's one Bal Koira, and that one Bal Koira is the Bach of the Bar Mitzvah. This is something new. We didn't have this before. We had the Aliyah before. I had the nuance that your Aliyah may have meant that you were partially reading your Aliyah in some places, but not reading the whole Sedra. This is the first clear source that it's a minig where the entire Kriya is being read by the Bar Mitzvah boy. There's a letter of the Rebbe where the Rebbe indicates like reading the Parsha is not rooted in tradition. I don't remember the exact words that the Rebbe means, that the Rebbe wrote over there, but Papasha, what the Rebbe meant is that amongst Chassidim this was not something that was done. And that is indeed the case. During today's class, we're stopping the clock more or less when we finish the 1600s. I'm not really interested in what happens after that because there's so much from the later centuries that it would be too messy. So I'm stopping the clock and not going later. But one of the things that you need to look into is what happens with the minig of the Bal Koira, and it definitely is not in the Hasidic community, and that's probably what the Rebbe means when he says that this is not an established minig. Okay, back to Worms in the 1600s. He says they say v'yazer v'yogin when we're starting Kriyas HaTorah, but we can't just do it regular. It's a Shabbos bar mitzvah. There's a nigun yafa that's special for the bar mitzvah, and the child is a chiyuv to have an aliyah. Chiyuv on our bar mitzvah likroisa l'sefer Torah. We know that already, right? Here it's formulated. He is a chiyuv. And when they make the Misha Beirach for the Bar Mitzvah boy after his Aliyah, that point, the father goes up and comes onto the migdal. That's what they would call the stage where the kriya is happening. He puts his hand on the child. We didn't have that before. And he says, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, which sheinu malchus. And he says the bracha of Baruch Shaptarani. Really interesting. The father is not standing next to his child when his child is the Bal Korah. The father is in his place. He's only going up to make the bracha. And then he goes back right away. He goes back to his place. Okay, as we saw, everything is choreographed in this community. Okay, then there are children who have a good voice and they know how to daven for the Amid. So then they're mispalim b'knisas Shabbos, borchu, v'shachris, and musaf. They become the chazan that Shabbos. Notice no lechun rana, and actually last class I tripped over the fact whether in Worms they had Kabbalah Shabbos in the 1600s. The answer is no, they did not have Kabbalah Shabbos in Worms yet, and you see it over here. Ma'ariv starts Baruch. And so the kid would be chazan for that, or Shachris, or Musaf, or all of them if he's able to do it. But then you have some kids, they don't know, and so they don't lein, and they're obviously not the chazan, but they get an aliyah. So not everyone is leining. But it sounds like a lot of people are leining. It sounds like it's actually the norm. To lein is like almost universal. Chazan, 50-50. That's what it sounds like from here. He goes on with the description and says that the father gives the son for the bar mitzvah new clothes for that Shabbos. And he puts it on right at the beginning of Shabbos. Mincha time for Shabbos, that is when they make the soda of the bar mitzvah. The shamish is not the one who calls the people. Rather, it's done differently here in Worms. An hour before Mincha, the bar mitzvah boy himself goes to call people to his seudah. He wears his special bar mitzvah clothes, and he goes into the houses of the people who are invited, and he says, please come to join for the shalosh seudos, the third Shabbos meal, seudas habar mitzvah, which would happen Mincha time, after Mincha. They would come, they eat and they drink, and they're happy with the child and with the father, with the mother, and with the friends. And the child of the bar mitzvah says a derasha, and it's a derasha about bar mitzvah. Again, in all these sources, there's a derasha, but it's always related to the concept of a bar mitzvah. And then the child does zimun, which we already saw in the 1400s, zimun, Friday night by the meal. Here you see zimun by the soda. Here's a very nice description, tying basically all the pieces together. There are a few chidushim here, such as the Bal Korah for the whole parsha. Another thing I didn't stress before when we spoke about the Baruch Shaptarani, it says that the father says it quietly. It's very interesting. Why does the father say it quietly? Usually a bracha, you say it out loud. And Bafrati is saying with Shem HaMalchus, so another yid should be able to say Amen. It could be, I don't know. It could be that it was, maybe this is associated with the doubt of whether it's a thing or not. I don't know exactly how saying it's silent solves that doubt, but at least no one will yell at you. No, right? So at least maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Now, it's at this point, before we move to the last piece, where we need to notice. We've seen a lot of sources. What's the common denominator between all the sources that we've seen? The earliest reference is from the 1000s, and we brought it up to the mid-1600s. It's a nice chunk of time, but it's one region. It's one region. It's France, it's Germany, it's Poland. And as you know, Poland is Jews from France and Germany who migrated eastward. So it's essentially what we would call, in the broadest sense, Ashkenazi Jewry. There's a lot of other Jewish communities at this time, in other places in the world. And silence. Silence on all of the matters, on every single one, on the aliya, and on the mishnah, and on the derasha, and on the Baruch Shaptarani, 0 silence, which seems to suggest that it was just, today you're bar mitzvah, today you're obligated, yippee-doo. An aliyah, eventually I'll get an aliyah. Baruch Shaptarani, no, we're not doing that. Mishnah, no, we're not doing that. And as much as it's hard for us to wrap our heads around that, it does seem that that was actually the norm in all these other communities. Otherwise, the silence in all these sources, from the Goinim in Bavel and the Rishonim in Sfard, and even the early generations of Gdolei Achronim in Sephardic communities in North Africa and Spain and other places, is just too much to ignore. And so this leads us into this very interesting reality of something that's so big and so prominent and so important in the Ashkenazi Jewish community that's seemingly completely absent elsewhere. And now we come to the last segment of the shir, and that is to discuss the issue of turning 13. Is this concept of 13 and 1 day. Well, we're going to learn a very interesting story about 13 and 1 day. So let's understand what this is all about. In Pirkei Avos we say, Ben shlosh mitzvahs, period. You turn 13, you're bar mitzvah. Now, what happens is that elsewhere Chazal throw in the concept of 13 and a day. And Tosfos tells us that therefore we must say that in Avos, when it says Ben shlosh mitzvahs, it also means 13 and a day. Where is this other place? It's the Mishnah Maseches Nida. The Mishnah Maseches Nida in the Gemara, it's on Daf Mem Hey. It talks about nedarim, and it says like this: if a child makes a neder when he's 12 years old and 1 day, you have to check, you have to examine. Does he understand what a neder is? Does he understand that this is a pledge to Hashem? Does he get it? And if he does, so then he has to keep it. But if he doesn't, then you don't need to worry about the neder. However, Ben Yud Gimel Shana v'Yom Echad, from 13 and 1 day, now Nedar of Kayamin, now his neder has to be kept. You don't even need to make an investigation. So it would be a little funny to assume that this doesn't apply to Ben Shlosh Esrei L'Mitzvah. So Tosfos takes it as a given that anything, we don't know what Yom Echad means right now. But whatever it does mean, it probably applies, Tosfos says, not a probably, but it does apply to the concept of a bar mitzvah in general. Now that led to this fascinating story that brings us back to the minhagim of worms. Rabbi Yosef Shamish, who's the author of these minhagim, tells us a bididi hava uvda, a story that happened with him. He says, I became bar mitzvah in the year Shin Ayin Zayin, which is the year 1617. And it was Shabbos Parshas Tetzaveh, but that was the day of his birthday. His birthday was on Shabbos. Yud Gimel L'Chodesh Adar Rishon, 13th to Chodesh Adar Rishon. Lamadati Akriya, like a good Jewish boy in Worms, in the year 1617, he took out his Tikkun Kodim and he prepared the Sedra to read it in Shul. The rabbis in the community found out on Shabbos, I came prepared. I was ready to read Parshas Tetzaveh. They didn't let me read it. They made me lay the next week on Chaf Adar Rishon. And I did it. Think about this. You have kids who it takes them 6 months to prepare the parsha. They're working on this. The kid comes to shul, they say, sorry Charlie, you're not leining today because today's your birthday and you need to have shlosh esrei v'yom echad. You don't have the yom echad, you're not leining. You want to lane next week, no problem, kisisa, you could lane. What does this kid do? He goes home and he learns kisisa. It sounds like he laned the whole thing. It sounds like, I think kisisa is like a longer parsha, I think, and he pulls it off. Why? Why did they not let him lane? They said you need to be 13 and a day. That's what Chazal say. Where did it happen? I said before it happened in Worms. That's a mistake. The Nasa Mai says be'ir v'kila k'dosha fulda. Okay, just they don't do fulda, they do vulda, as we've been discussing. Fine. So Fulda is a town. This is where he lived in the year 1617. Later is where he's in Worms. The rabbis in Fulda did not let him do the kriya cause of this. The same thing happened here in Worms with the child Baruch, the son of Zekeli Elzos. Okay. Tell me more about that name. The rabbis, the Bnei Yeshiva, didn't let him lane. This kid also does it. Unbelievable. This kid also, I assume likroi over here means the same thing that it meant for him, to lane. So he did it the next Shabbos. Where is this coming from? It's coming from the most famous name that halacha lamaisa. I don't want to talk about when a Rishon mentions something in passing. I'm looking for someone halacha lamaisa that says 13 is not enough. You need to wait to the next day. So the most important and prominent and clear voice about this lived 200 years before this in the 1400s in Germany. His name was Rabbi Yisrael of Brunn. And remember, I showed you earlier 2 sources from the 1400s in Ashkenaz where the kid is already becoming chazan. The bar mitzvah, Shabbos, he's already a chazan. So that leads to the following question in Shas Mari Bruna. Shalom lecha, shalom, ahuvi, he's writing to a rabbi named Yaakov. You asked me about Ben Yid Gimel Shana Pachas Yom Echad. He's 13, but he doesn't have that day. Is he allowed to be the chazan? and likros b'Torah. I don't know what likros b'Torah here means. I don't know if it means to be the Baal Koira. If it does, now you have Baal Koira in the 1400s, which would be interesting, but it may just be an aliyah. I don't know if there's a way to tell. But the other thing is, Imrash aliyah shatz. That's going on in the 1400s. We know that from the other sources. So now the question was, could it be a chazan on that Shabbos? What's his answer? Even when that day, you need to wait till your birthday is Aleph Nisan. You need to wait till Aleph Nisan is finished, because that's your Yom Echad. And so you need to wait for that to be over, then you could be the chazan. So here, Rabbi Yisrael Bruna, a very important posek, taking the concept of Yom Echad very literally and saying this is absolutely the case. What's the idea? Why would he need that extra day? So there's the Teisus Yom Tov has a sefer called Divrei Chamudos. And in the sefer Divrei Chamudos, he has a long shtickle on this, and he explains the svara. The svara explains this like this: maybe to be a bar mitzvah, it's not enough to get to the day of Reish Chodesh Nisan. If the child is born, let's say 11:35 in the morning, so you need to get to 11:35. Now you're a bar mitzvah. The problem is, do people know? No one knows. You know the day, you don't know the hour. We can't trust people for the hour. So really you need to wait till 11:35, and that would be good, because people don't keep track of hours and can make mistakes, so we're safe, and we say wait till the end of the day and start the next day. Okay, that's the argument that he says Rabbi Yisrael Bruna and others like him would this would be the root of their position. However, not everyone agreed with this interpretation of what Chazal meant. And Rabbi Yosef Shamish tells us that years later, after many years, he spoke to the Goin in Worms named Zusman, who is the Rav in Worms. And he also spoke to Zusman's son, whose name was Itzik. And he said, no, they're wrong. That interpretation is wrong. Because when it says Yud Gimel V'Yom Echad, it doesn't mean you need an extra day. Rather, what does it mean? We don't want someone's like, they have their 12th birthday, then they go for a month, and it's like, hey, halacha has this concept of mixas hayom kekuloi, mixas hashana kekuloi, and you do have this sometimes where Jewish law says the beginning of it counts. So then the guy is 12 and a month, and boom, he is saying now he's a bar chiyuva. So Chazal didn't want us. Now, like, no, you need Yud Gimel Shanim Shleimos. How do you say Yud Gimel Shanim Shleimos? So if I was writing it, I would say Yud Gimel Shanim Shleimos. Fine, but they decided not to write it that way. They said V'Yom Echad, which means you need to wait the whole year out, and then you wait to the beginning of the next day. So your birthday is on Beis Nisan, so you need to wait for Aleph Nisan to be finished. Okay, Aleph Nisan is finished, and now Beis Nisan started. You waited out the entire year, but now you're good. You could be the chazan from Ma'ariv on Beis Nisan or the Beis Nisan, not a problem. This is how he understood it. Reb Yosef Yuspahan is another important source that deals with the manhagim of Ashkenaz during this century, during the 1600s. Till now, we're talking about Reb Yosef Shamish. He's in Worms. Reb Yosef Yuspahan is in Frankfurt. And his sefer is Yosef Eimetz. He's a little earlier. He passed away in the 1630s. And he contends with the same issue. He writes, if you are turning bar mitzvah on Shabbos, on that Shabbos, you can read in the Sefer Torah, you can be the Shliach Tzibur, you can do Zimun and Birchas Hamazon, even though we have this thing that you need to have Yom Echad. It doesn't get in the way. And he says, from many years ago, the rabbis here in Frankfurt had said many times that you shouldn't lean the Torah on Shabbos, you have to wait till the next one. So just like in Worms, there were many people who followed what we'll call Rabbi Yisrael Bruna's approach. In Frankfurt also, there were Rabbanim that were not letting bar mitzvah boys read on that Shabbos. But then Chazru la'oros, they said, no, it's okay, you could do it on the Shabbos, the boy b'yom of the bar mitzvah. Why? The mixas yom ha-Shabbos hu kekuloi, because the little of that Shabbos counts as the whole. So in other words, you're satisfying ben yud gimel v'yom echad. To me, I'm not an expert in the subject, but to me this sounds like a different argument. This sounds like ben yud gimel shana v'yom echad means that you taka need 13, and you also need a day. You also need a day. Why do you need a day? I don't know, but you also need a day. Now, in halacha, because we have the rule of mixas hayom kekuloi, so the first minute of the day, you already have the whole yom echad. So that's what Rabbi Yosef Yuspahan is saying, the Rabbanim in Frankfurt said, which would allow the kid to celebrate his bar mitzvah and do everything on the Shabbos. That's not the same thing Rabbi Yosef Shamish told us the rabbis in Worm said. The argument over there was that Yom Echad was just coming to say you need to do a whole year without invoking the argument of Mixas Hayom Kekulai. In fact, it was there to negate that because there's a problem of Mixas Hayom Kekulai. So you could also say Mixas Hashana Kekulai. So when the person turns 12 a month or two later, he's going to say, I'm bar mitzvah already. We say, no, Yom Echad, you need to bring it all the way to the end of the year. That's not saying that you also need an extra day, but just that the Mixas Hayom is Kekulai. So it sounds like it's two arguments, and what's really interesting is Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim Siman Nun Gimel. When he discusses this issue, he says you don't need to worry about it. Most of the Achronim said you don't need to worry about it, even though Mari Bruno is Mari Bruno, and others joined him. But most of the Gdolei HaPoskim said no, it's not an issue. Your birthday is Aleph Nisan. You can do all the stuff on Aleph Nisan. When the Alter Rebbe discusses it and says, but what does Yom Echad mean? He actually says both arguments. He says the argument of, we're trying to negate the idea that you can cut off early in the year. And he's like, Mixas Hayom Kekulai. So that sounds like he's saying two arguments. I don't fully understand this. This requires more iyun for another time. Now, one of the poskim that dealt with this issue, the Bach, he brought evidence from the Maharil that we had earlier, that the Maharil was not at all concerned about this Mixas Hayom Kekulai, that this Yom Echad business. And Bechlal, here's the place to point out, we don't see this being discussed earlier. Again, not Lamaisa. I don't see earlier cases before the 1400s, before Mari Bruna. I don't see people talking about it. Do you do need it? You don't need it. It looks like it's an issue from the 1400s to the 1600s, and this is the time that this issue is being discussed. So the Bach brought evidence from the Maril that you don't need to worry about this. Why? Because remember earlier we had the Shaila. Someone asked the Maril, could the boy be the Chazan on the Shabbos of his Bar Mitzvah? What did Maril say? Maril said, no, because you're being Makal Shabbos early. So you can't. Why did Maril say that? Maril should have said, no, you need to wait till Mitzvah Shabbos. He didn't say that. What does that show you? That shows you the Maril wasn't concerned about that. That's a very strong raya that the Bach brings into this discussion. We're going to conclude today's shir by talking about this issue of Mixas Hayom, of the Yom Echad, as it played out in a story by the Mittel Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah, because this issue surfaced over there. So on Taf Reish Tzadik Gimel, 1933, Chav Hei Shvat, the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, spoke a lot about Bar Mitzvah, and he mentioned there the following, that by the Mittel Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah, it was Parshas Vayetze to Mincha. The Alter Rebbe was the Baal Koira, and he said that his son, the Mittel Rebbe, should get Shlishi, and that should be his Bar Mitzvah Aliyah. This led to a Tifa Lamdisha Shmuas. Between all of the Lamdim, all of the scholars were discussing this issue. Why did the Alter Rebbe push off the Bar Mitzvah Aliyah to Shabbos and didn't have it on Thursday, which was the day of his Bar Mitzvah? This is really interesting because all the early sources were always pushing it off to Shabbos. That was very normal. But what the Frierdiker Rebbe is telling us over here, and again, we need to do more work in the 1700s and the 1800s to understand what was going on during those centuries. But here you reach a point where in this story, people are like, what? Why is it not Thursday? Why is it being pushed to Shabbos? So that's one discussion. So what was an answer? The answer was, because you need to be Ben Yud Gimel Shana V'Yom Echad. So you can't have it on Thursday. So the next opportunity is Shabbos. So that was an answer that people liked. That maybe the Alter, which would be a major chiddush, because the vast majority of the poskim don't go in that direction. But okay, maybe the Alter Rebbe, in this case with his son, was going in that direction. So the Svaras Halamdin hat sich gut zugenommen. People liked this theory. But the problem was, and why not Shabbos morning? Why did he do it Shabbos Mincha? And no one could come up with the reason, because there is no reason in Nigla, in pure halacha, that would prefer a Mincha Aliyah over the Shachris Aliyah. So they're speaking to the Mittel Rebbe's brother, and his name is Reb Chaim Avram. And Reb Chaim Avram tells them that he heard from his father, the Alter Rebbe, what the logic was. That the Zayda said, the Zayda is the Baal Shem Tov, and that the Baal Shem Tov told it to the Maggid, that we need to be mishtadel, that the first time a bar mitzvah boy has his aliyah, it should be the kriya of Monday and Thursday and Mincha Shabbos Kodesh. Because the kriya of Monday and Thursday is an Eis Ratzon L'mayla, just like Minchas Shabbos is an Eis Ratzon L'mayla. Minchas Shabbos is the highest level because Kabbalah says it's Rava D'chol Ravin, a very lofty level. Sheni and Chamishi is close to that, even if it's not that. In terms of it being Eis Ratzon, which by the way is why we say extra tachanunim on Monday and Thursday, and it's why fasts are on Monday and Thursday. It's a more auspicious time for these things, and we want the child's bar mitzvah aliyah to be associated with the Eis Ratzon, and that's why it's going to be on a Monday, on a Thursday, or the mincha of Shabbos. And so it has nothing to do with the Yom Echad. No. Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch tells us we don't need to worry about the Yom Echad. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with when do you want the child to have an aliyah. The Mitzvah Rebbe could have had it Thursday. Thursday is here on the list. But it's also clear from here that Mincha Shabbos is preferred, is the best one, and that's why the Alter Rebbe wanted his son's bar mitzvah aliyah to be at that time. So this is a very interesting trajectory, because although I skipped a good few hundred years and I went straight to the Chabad story, but here you see the exact opposite of where we started. We started, what is the moment of the ceremony? The moment of the ceremony is Shabbos in the morning, in Shul, first aliyah, big deal, and that's when the father does the Baruch Sheptarani, and things kind of grew from there. Well, here, no Shabbos in the morning anymore. An aliyah that's much more low-key. Monday and Thursday, there's a lot fewer people in Shul. Shabbos Mincha, there's fewer people in Shul. The aliyahs, if they're sold, are, I don't even know if they're sold. It is considered a less prominent time, definitely a lot less attention then. And that's a very big departure. And in that way, what happened was that instead of the focal point being the aliyah on Shabbos, the focal point became the Mishnah, whenever the Mishnah was going to be on or around the time of the Bar Mitzvah. And so in that way, we have this very interesting reality. Again, it's hard to say we know for sure what's going on, because, what if in a year from now, a new manuscript is discovered and suddenly we learn something new, right? So we never know, we have to recognize that. But with the sources that we have today, this seems to be the story of the Bar Mitzvah celebration. It's decidedly an Ashkenazi Jewish story, and as the years go on, there are different elements that get added onto it. And in case it wasn't clear, the reason that we're doing this today is because I'm making a bar mitzvah coming up very soon. And we have the Bach of the bar mitzvah sitting here, right? His name is Meir Nosson, my dear son, my b'chor. And we hope that the Eibishter gives Meir Nosson Hakohen the koyach, that once he's becoming Mitzvah v'oisa, that it should be a very special day for you, and it should lead to great things in the years ahead. Your parents should have nachas from you. You should do wonderful things for yourself and in the environment around you. Mazel tov, mazel tov.